Hello, I'm going to be showing you and explaining an experiment to do with oil and water and how they mix and how this has an effect on marine life, for example, birds, like a seagull, which land on the surface of the water. So I have two containers here. Both of them are filled with just tap water. One of them I'm going to put some oil in. So before I start the experiment, I ask, does anyone know what happens when you put oil and water together? Do they mix together? Do they separate? What happens? Then I'll put some oil in it, just plain old canola oil or any kind of cheap vegetable oil. Put a little bit on the surface of this container. Now right away the kids will be able to see that there is a bubble, a big bubble forming, and it's right on the surface. It's not mixing at all with the water. So this is really important, because this system is going to represent the ocean when there's an oil spill, and this system is going to represent just the ocean without any oil spills. So what we're going to see is what happens to the feather when you put it in the water and then when you put it in the oil, or the water that has oil on it. So to start off with, I'll put the feather in the water mixture, and you can see that the water just skims right off the surface. It's not getting the feather wet at all, and the feather stays nice and dry. It just runs right off. And that's because birds have adapted, so they are able to stay afloat, and they are able to not be harmed by the water, because the water can just float right off, or skim right off their feathers. Now when we put the feather in the oil, you can see that the oil soaks right into the feather, and it makes it look very wet. You can see that, very wet and kind of sticking together, and it's not able to repel the water anymore. So this is a problem because many seabirds land on the surface of the ocean, either to feed or just to rest. They come in big groups as well, and this is really dangerous for them because then the water doesn't just skim off their feathers, and it can affect them when they're flying. So when we put the feather back into the water, you can see that now it no longer stays on the surface. It floats underneath the surface of the water. And that's really dangerous, because this means that a bird might not be able to stay afloat if it has oil on its feathers. Now this can be related to the natural systems. If an oil spill occurs, birds that land on the surface of the water might not be able to stay afloat, and they might sink and drown, which is really, really sad and really dangerous for our marine life. So now, to figure out how we can clean up this oil spill, we'll put the feather aside and we can pass around, let the kids look at it. But we'll have some ideas bouncing around about how we might be able to clean up the oil, because even if you run your fingers through the water, it still forms all these bubbles on the surface, and it doesn't completely clean it up. So what kind of things could we use to clean up the water? Well, maybe we could use a paper towel. We could give the kids a paper towel to clean it up. So if they skim the paper towel across the surface of the water, does it clean it up? Not really. It's still all over the place. It's still in bubbles, and it's still all over the entire container. So that obviously didn't work. You can't use some sort of big paper towel to soak up all the oil. It doesn't soak up into the paper towel at all. So next, we're going to try using some soap. And we'll talk about what happens when you mix soap and water and oil together, what the kids might think will happen before we put it in. Put a couple drops in here. Right away, you can see that the oil bubbles go right to the sides of the container. So they don't want to mix with the soap. That's not something that they want to do. So they all go to the sides of the tank, which is really important because now the middle of the tank and most of the water doesn't have any oil on it anymore. So that's a really important thing. And that could be illustrated, if we mix it around here, you can see, that can be illustrated as one way of mixing oil and water together is by putting some sort of soap mixture in that will help combine all those water molecules and oil molecules together. So now if you mix it around a little bit and then let it sit so that the water is nice and still, you can see that there are no longer any big bubbles or big pockets of oil on the surface, which is great for marine birds. So that would be one experiment that I would show. I'd describe how this relates to a natural system, and hopefully kids will be able to make the connection. Thank you.